I've learned that most kids learn their lesson after they get a slap on the wrist 1 or 2 times. If you were a kid like me, you didn't really learn your lesson until like the 14th or 15th time. Now, my little brother was the exact opposite. If he had done something wrong, and he was corrected, he straightened up by the time that the second came around. He was that kid that most parents dreamed of, the opposite of me, and it was bad enough that I was good at getting in trouble, but my brother's good behavior showed me up even more. So, it really stood out to me when he started to become more like me. It's not that he turned bad in any capacity, but it's more like he just began getting an itch that he could not scratch. Entertaining at first, the way he suddenly wouldn't share with other kids. Then, he graduated to taking things from other kids. I thought that my brother was becoming a bully, but he never quite got to that. It was like he got this itch. I started to manifest as him eating more, like a lot more. There were times that I couldn't get seconds. My brother's transformation brought frustration to everybody. My parents were upset to see him turning into this person he wasn't. Then, the most disturbing part, his appearance began to change. My parents said that he began to look like an addict. I didn't quite understand what that meant. There were a few lines on his face that shouldn't have been on the face of a child. Discoloration, the kind you associate with restlessness, stress. We used to be able to look into those same eyes and see great kindness. We began seeing nothing but frustration, as if some urgent need couldn't be met. Nobody really knew what to make of this transformation. I was probably the least concerned, though. I was just glad that there was another bad kid in the house, and not everything was pinned on big old mean brother. It was a discovery that I made one night that truly changed how I felt. I woke up in the middle of the night, needing to use the bathroom. Nothing out of the ordinary. In order to get to the bathroom, I had to walk down the hallway, past my parents' room and my little brother's room. It was when I walked past that I felt this terrible draft. It was this piercing, icy cold, as if there was an open window directly behind that closed door. For a brief moment, I even saw my breath in front of my face. On the way back to my bed, I paused in front of my brother's room. Then I didn't feel a thing. Whatever had happened, it was done and gone. Over the course of several weeks, this happened again, and I had to wake up in the middle of the night. I passed by his door and got a blast of cold air. One of those same times, I felt I decided I was going to look inside. I decided that I would be quiet and just make sure that his window was shut, and that was all. What I saw when I opened the door made me freeze inside, as well as out. Something was perched on the head of my little brother's bed. It had very long legs and long arms, and it was as folded up as it could be, like it was trying to perch like a vulture with folded wings. It had this emaciated shape, as if whatever it was hadn't eaten in weeks. The moonlight picked out just enough details of the head to see that it was indeed a skull, an animal skull of some kind, with antlers sprouting from its head and the points looking sharp enough to be meat hooks. Then, a heavy, cold vapor tumbled like a waterfall from its mouth. My little brother opened his eyes, and he tilted his head upward toward me and smiled, holding that pose for several unnaturally long seconds. Then he sat up and smiled at me in a very exaggerated fashion, the way a child might if they feel somebody has been looking at them too long, or the way a clown might. Wide open eyes, bare teeth, open mouth. Holding that pose and face for as long as I stood there. The heavy cold vapor from the mouth of this thing behind him billowing around his lap, all across the surface of his bed. After that, when I had to get up to use the bathroom, I didn't dare get up unless I was absolutely about to explode. And when I was, I rushed by my brother's bedroom door for fear that it might explode open, and I would see him sitting in bed with that same horrible face, looking at me, waiting for his door to open. Eventually, I stopped feeling that draft next to his door. Eventually, he went back to being normal, that my parents knew at least. Eventually, there was no longer a bad kid under our roof for me to relate to even a little bit. I guess whatever possession, whatever demon that thing was, ultimately didn't find what it was looking for. Why it let him go and stop possessing him is far beyond me. Now, whether it truly was a demon and he needed an exorcism, I don't know. I don't really believe in the paranormal or anything of that nature, but I can't deny what I saw and how it changed my little brother. I'm not legally allowed to disclose my last name, but let's just say there's probably a chance you've heard of me or my family. We're synonymous with money and power and fame. Like any other brood of rich people, we had reproduced prolifically, which meant that there was more than enough drama and tension to go around. Not the least of which was who was going to inherit so-and-so's money when so-and-so finally bit the dust. You think it might just be the stuff of movies, but I'm sad to say it does happen in real life. That's, after all, why it is in the movies. It's so ridiculous, it automatically makes an amazing script. All you have to do is pretend you are making a documentary, and it becomes a comedy, or whatever the hell else is popular these days. Suffice to say that the oldsters with all the real gold tucked away decided that people like me and the family were far too soft and had no idea what hard work was. They don't know what hard work was either, but I couldn't afford to tell them that. They developed a little rite of passage to inheriting their riches when they would be gone. They decided that the whole lot of us should spend 90 days in a remote location. The only difference between that and one of the reality shows is there wouldn't be a camera, there wouldn't be a script, and no safety net. If we starved or froze to death, it was on us. Nobody cared. Nobody was going to come and rescue us. So, there were 5 of us total, and I think 3 of them were surprised that we weren't going to set up a new reality show. These grown men, suddenly, looking like children that had heard they weren't going to have video games or ice cream for a very long time. The cabin in which we stayed in wasn't too remote. The only way we'd been in trouble is if we had an exceptionally bad snowstorm. The television being very small, as was most everything else about the cabin. It was comfortable, of course. I had a feeling they were going to have a harder time winning their inheritance. Then it happened. The worst snowstorm to hit in the entire area in 30 years cut through and dumped on us completely. We weren't just snowed in because of the neighboring roads. We were snowed in because our cabin was literally buried. Keep in mind, this location, while private, is very remote and vast in the wilderness. There ain't anybody around here. I mean, we're miles and miles out. I was the last one that woke up, and opening the front door to discover a solid wall of white, barricading us all in. Communications were down, and we could not make any kind of calls. Every last cell phone tower not giving us the service we need. It must have been out of commission. The food that we were supposed to receive to replenish our supplies for the last leg of our trial by fire wasn't going to make it, and there was no way our food supplies were going to last long enough. We tried to make what we had last. Too many of us, though, were undisciplined, completely foreign to the notion of suffering or deprivation, and after a few days of doing without, they would give in and eat as much as they could before somebody slapped them down. The things about people that are born with a silver spoon in their mouths that we normally think are funny can take a very dark turn when survival is the key. These men that had been by my side as children, spending Christmas together, Thanksgiving dinner, outings, climbing the ladder to fame together, they were suddenly looking like wolves, wild beasts that would take everything for themselves and leave you to starve without a twinge of conscience. It only reinforced the brutality behind the words of our elders before this entire thing began. Nobody was going to get us out. People became what they centered their lives around. And here, I was trapped in a cabin with people raised in a family that centered their lives around cold, hard cash. And that was just the beginning. Our firewood was also part that had been buried in the snow outside. Digging our way out to it was one ordeal. Getting it to burn was another. We were colder and hungrier than we had ever been. That's when I woke up one morning to one of them dead. He lay in bed with his face with a sickly color of blue. One by one, the others came to the room and then immediately had to leave as they realized what had happened. All except for one. He lingered just a little too long, staring just a little too hard, and a strange thought had entered my mind when I saw his behavior, but I could not think there would be anything to it. I would find out that night that my glimmer of a hunch was correct. I woke up in the middle of the night, feeling more than just a biting cold. I also felt like something was extremely fearfully wrong. The air had a charge to it, and even after I got on my bed, it felt like I had a weighted blanket thrown over me. The cold wasn't just pressing in on my skin. It was somehow reaching down deep into my bones, and I shivered violently, almost to the point that I could not walk. It was as still as a tomb in that cabin, and I could hear strange sounds coming down the hallway of the room where my dead relative lay. The room where there shouldn't have been any sounds at all. I somehow knew what I was going to find, but it was too horrendous for my conscious mind to entertain. I went in there to investigate, and there was the youngest among us, with blood staining his face as he ate away at the dead body. His whole manner was that of a ravenous wolf, rather than a reluctant survivalist. I screamed at him to stop at what he was doing. Clearly he had turned insane from food and cold deprivation. He had turned his face toward me, and his eyes were completely whited out. He gave me a hiss that no human should be able to create. There was even a slight rattle to it. His teeth looked different, his nails longer. He was just the right angle, and I could see the reflection in one of the small windows. I'm telling you now, I'm not entirely sure what I saw, but I saw something with antlers, and much less meat on its bones. We tried to restrain him, and he mauled all of us to a greater or a lesser degree. Finally, in a display of superhuman speed and strength, he plowed through the snow that was barricading the front door, minus the small tunnel we had carved out to get wood. That was the last we ever saw or heard of him. Our elders pretended to be appalled to find out what happened. We were starved shipwrecks of human beings by the time anybody was able to get out to us. I can tell, though, that they were laughing, and perhaps on some deep down level, they would never admit they were happy that there was one less person fighting to get the money. I know that what I saw was not some hunger-induced hallucination. That's when my research began, and when I discovered the term wendigo for the first time. Since all this, I've been undergoing severe psychiatric treatment ever since, and I've rambled to my therapist about everything that I read about wendigos, especially the part that their turning doesn't always happen when they first taste human flesh. Sometimes, it begins far before with intense greed, selfishness, especially when it's to the point that it's destructive towards others, including themselves. Not surprisingly, though, nobody takes me seriously. I'm just another rich brat that got bitten too hard by the real world and is having trouble coping. Again, I apologize for not disclosing my name, but if you dig long enough, you'll find a well-known celebrity family who is mysteriously down one person. This is the closest I'll be able to tell the world exactly what kind of people are in power, the kind of people that have all the money. Because if everything I've read is true, then everybody in my family is a wendigo waiting to happen.